Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being with us. I'm David Selberg, CEO at Hospice of Santa Barbara. Last year, our Illuminate Speakers series reached close to 10,000 viewers from some 46 states and over 58 countries. Tonight, we have so many folks tuning in from across the United States as well as internationally. A very special thank you to the Santa Barbara Foundation, to Robin and Roger Hemovitz, and to the Natalie Orfala Foundation for their generous support and sponsorship of this entire Illuminate Speakers series in 2022. Now I have the pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague at Hospice of Santa Barbara, Charles Caldwell, who will go over some housekeeping items. Charles?
Hi there, David. It's so nice to be here tonight, and really looking forward to listening to the conversation with Kelly and Jonathan. I think it's going to be super interesting. We also just wanted to share that this whole Illuminate Speaker series really came about during the pandemic because we were hearing from so many community members just about some of the journeys that they were on, some of the struggles they were on. So we thought we can offer a free series with amazing speakers and offer that to everyone all over the country as well. And so we do this, of course, only with your support. So if you would like to help continue this wonderful series into the future, we ask you to consider making a donation. And you can find those instructions on the chat right now at our website. So that's it for the housekeeping. And David, now back to you.
Thank you so much, Charles. And now I have truly the honor to introduce our featured speaker. We're so excited to have her with us, and we've been hoping for this for a while, and now it's happening. Her name is Kelly McGonigal, and our moderator with her will be Jonathan Bastian. Dr. Kelly McGonigal is a health psychologist and lecturer at the Stanford University Graduate School of Business. Her TED Talk on stress is one of the top 10 most viewed TED Talks with over 29 million views. In January of 2020, Oprah Magazine named Kelly the first ever O Visionary, people whose groundbreaking way of seeing the world means a better future for us all. She served as the psychology consultant for the New York Times Education Initiative and has appeared on television shows such as the Today Show, Good Morning America, and the Anderson Cooper Show. Kelly is passionate about animal rescue and is a trained cat adoption counselor. Kelly's latest book, The Joy of Movement: How Exercise Helps Us Find Happiness, Hope, Connection, and Courage, is now available. Leading the conversation with Kelly is Jonathan Bastian. Jonathan is the creator and host of Life Examined on KCRW. He's an award-winning public radio host whose work has been recognized by the Associated Press and the Los Angeles Press Club and others. He has interviewed many leading thinkers, writers, and artists, including Jared Diamond, Jack Kornfield, Deepak Chopra, Barbara Kingsolver, Gary Snyder, Ann Patchett, and Oliver Sacks. So without further ado, we're excited to welcome Kelly to our Illuminate Speaker Series. And Jonathan, take it away. Thank you.
David, thank you so much. And one final little tidbit for our viewers out there, and maybe the most important, in my journey to become a therapist, I was a trainee at the Hospice of Santa Barbara. The first clients I ever worked with were in this incredible institution under the great Suzanne Retzinger, who was my supervisor, and it was a place that I experienced tremendous growth just outside of my work in public radio. So the topics of grief and end of life, psychotherapy are things that are a big part of who I am. And I'm so excited to be able to collaborate today with Kelly to have this conversation. So first off, Kelly, welcome to you. It's wonderful to share this space. Really nice.
Thank you. It's
today.
good to see you.
Yeah, I'm excited where we're going to take this. And in the spirit of bringing everybody into this together, I want everybody to take a second, to take a breath, and to just think about this one engagement question. And I'm going to ask you to put this into the chat. So we're going to be talking about stress today and rethinking it. But the question I'd like to ask is this: in a time of stress, let's say like a pandemic that we've all been through, in one word, what's something that brings you joy? So in one word, what's something that brings you joy? And I'd love for you to go into the chat, type that in so we can all just share a little bit of energy together and we can begin this. And Kelly, I'm going to up the stakes with us. I'm going to ask you to show me something that brings you joy. So what do you have for me? I want to see it.
I was going to show you my cat, Moo, who just left. She was walking around in my lap. So one thing that brings me great joy are my rescue pets. And I promise she will be back for me to show her off in a little bit. What about you? What's something that has brought you joy?
Well, interestingly enough, I'm actually in my father's office right now, Ed Bastian, who lives in Santa Barbara. So I was surrounded by stuff, but I actually found this where we grew up in a very musical family. So I play a lot of music. And I remember this is a flute that he brought back from India years ago. And it's been sitting in our house wherever we've moved. And occasionally we would play it and pass it around. Not that we can play it well, but it's just this beautiful thing that I look at and I think of music. I think of the calmness that it brings into my life. And yeah, it's been a special part of, I guess, our family.
That's such a great object. And I just want to note what I'm seeing in the chat. So many great themes of humanity. I see nature. I see connection with other people. I see movement. I see spiritual practices. Yes. I see humor. I see a lot of stuff that really, I think we'll be talking a little bit today about what some of those instincts to find the meaning, the joy, the connection, what that has to do with stress.
Yeah, I think we're going to get to quite a bit of this. But I want to back up just a little bit before we launch into a lot of the stuff. And I'm going to just kind of present something that I've noticed, whether it's been as a clinician, therapist, whether it's been as a public radio host, just trying to have conversations that resonate in the public space. It seems like we are maybe living in two different ages that could be connected, but we hear about the age of anxiety as one. And I mean, I just came across another study recently that said it could be up to 1/3 of Americans, particularly over the last few years, have been dealing with acute anxiety, for some an anxiety disorder. On the other side, we hear we're living in the age of stress and what chronic stress can do to the body, what it can also do to mental health disorders. And what I find interesting about these two is that they're perhaps the most commonly used words we have and also the most loosely defined. They kind of mean everything and sometimes nothing. And so why don't we start kind of breaking down some of these terms together? How do you make sense of what I've been noticing? And maybe you can put it through the frame in which you understand things.
Yeah. I definitely relate to that. I should say I'm somebody who was born with an extreme tendency toward anxiety. So I have thought a lot about anxiety in addition to stress. Well, let me start by defining the two, the way that I think about it, which is informed both by the science, what contemporary psychological science would say, but also just my experience talking to people and thinking a lot about the roots of suffering. So stress, the way that I define it is it's what arises in your body, in your brain, right? In your experience, it's what arises when something that you care about is at stake. So it includes thoughts, it includes emotions, it includes changes in your hormones, in your nervous system, in your brain chemistry. Stress is this experience. It's a response. It's your biology's attempt to help you meet a moment that matters. And we have this whole repertoire of stress responses. So one of the things I think, like in that definition, some things that might be a new way for some people to think about stress that I want to highlight is the way that I think about stress is it's not about all the stuff you don't want to have to deal with, all the situations you wish were not reality. It's not the external trigger, right? Stress is actually, it's a human capacity. So that's one thing that I think can help us make some important distinctions. Another thing that I think is really important to note is that we have stress because some part of you thinks that this is a moment that matters, and there's something that you can do. There's some way that you can respond that will help you meet the moment, take care of yourself, get closer to your goals, protect people you care about, rise to the challenge, right? It's an attempt to engage with reality. And another thing that's I think a new idea for a lot of people is that stress is way more than fight or flight. So most people who've heard experts talk about the biology of stress have heard experts describe one type of stress response, fight or flight, as if it's the only way that your body and brain respond in moments that matter. And fight or flight, I mean, I'm sure people know what it is because we do experience it. Perhaps you feel panicked, you feel overwhelmed, you feel angry, all these changes in your body. You've got the adrenaline, you've got the cortisol, your heart is pounding. It's not always a healthy state, and it's not always a skillful response, but it's really great for things like emergencies. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of messages put out there that every time you experience stress, anytime life requires you to deal with a challenge or an obstacle or a change, you will by default enter into this state that can turn you into the worst version of yourself. That is not always skillful, and that can be toxic, particularly when chronic. In reality, you have this whole repertoire of stress responses. Some of them are healthy for you. Some of them are, great for your immune system. Some of them encourage us to actually be kinder to others or kinder to ourselves. Some of these stress responses actually help the brain become more resilient rather than damaged by stress. And so one of the ideas, and we can talk about this in any way you want, but one of the ideas that I think is really important for people to understand is that when you experience stress, it's not a sign that you are inadequate to life. It's not a sign that you are experiencing something that is fundamentally toxic and damaging to your health and your mental well-being. What it often is some part of you trying to get your attention and trying to figure out, what choices do I have here? How can I respond? And the more that we stop viewing stress as a cue that we need to be less stressed, right? Which leads to often destructive coping strategies like denial, procrastination, getting drunk, like avoidance strategies. Like, I can't be stressed right now, so I have to leave, walk out, dissociate. When we stop viewing stress as the most important thing is to be less stressed, and we use it as a sign that this is a moment that matters. We ask ourselves, who and what do I care about? We consider what our strengths are, our resources, where our support is available to us. It actually makes it more likely that you will have a physical response to stress that helps you and that is healthier in the long run. It makes it more likely that you will draw on your coping strengths and figure out what you can do or choose in this moment. And it's more likely that you will avoid some of what we think of as like the negative consequences of stress. But the other thing I want to highlight is, it's not like we can just choose to only do stress well and have good stress. So it's a complicated story. But when we allow ourselves to have this more nuanced and accepting view of stress, it allows stress to bring out what is good in us, as well as the other aspects of stress that can make us feel, overwhelmed or angry. And by the way, I do realize I've been talking for a long time, and you asked me to define anxiety, but could I be quiet for a moment and see what
you're doing great. I
that?
love this. I'm learning. I learn so much every time I listen to whatever you say. And so I love the way that you're thinking and kind of presenting this. I think in my own training as a therapist, we think of things like, like cognitive distortions. We use one word because it's so simple to call upon to describe everything, right? So whatever you're feeling, it's stress. Well, stress is bad, right? It's just such a simple thought loop you can go down. And so I appreciate you saying that built in that word are responses that can be maybe harmful in some ways, but can also be quite helpful in some ways.
And we all have
Anyway.
stress habits that are helpful and stress habits that are not helpful. So just to give you an example, one of the things that I'm really good at that is part of how humans can respond to stress is making meaning out of situations that are done. Right? This is part of what the stress response includes is, after some sort of trauma or loss or disappointment or personal hurt, your brain will try to refocus you on it to make sense of it, to learn from it. And it can be like really intrusive. It's not necessarily pleasant and fun.
Right.
But part of what's happening is you are encouraging yourself to reflect on it, to try to make some meaning out of it so that you can move forward, so that you can learn and grow. That's a natural stress strength for me. I'll eventually make meaning out of anything, even situations I would never, if I could get rid of it, I would.
Right.
That's not an option. But one of my worst stress habits is withdrawal. So when we experience stress, one strength that it can bring out in you is the desire to reach out for help. That is built into our biology, particularly if you were raised in an environment where you learned to trust people and you received a lot of support and it felt safe to ask for help and to lean on people. And people probably experience this. You feel stressed and you want to talk to someone, or you want to hug, or you want to reach out and be with people who care about you. Or maybe you want to find other people who are in the same situation as you so that you feel less alone. That is not a stress strength for me. I have the opposite habit, which can also, that we can learn, which is to hide and try to become invisible and not let other people see that there's a problem, because maybe being stressed makes you vulnerable, or needing help makes you vulnerable. And so one of the things that, is part of what it means to get good at stress or better at stress is to start to pay attention to what your own stress instincts and habits are, and to recognize that none of them mean there's something wrong with you. Often, even the stress habits that don't serve us, like getting angry or shutting down or trying to do everything yourself, like these are things that actually in some situations really are stress strengths and may have served you really well in other situations. Right. But when we start to get to learn more about all of the different ways that we are built to respond to stress, and we build this bigger repertoire, the better off we are.
Just curious to examine a little bit more medical background on this, because no matter what, we're built into our culture are just phrases like heart stress tests that you go get, or the idea that, if you're just so chronically stressed, you're going to develop things like hypertension, you're going to get heart disease. So can you explore that a little bit more with us? Because I'm wondering if there's a certain level of this that is still remains fairly toxic to the body. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I actually don't really think that it's levels. I think it's like a yes and for people who know improv. Most people, even people who are doing very well with stress, probably have some symptoms and side effects and negative consequences of the stress they've been through in their life. Right. And also, most people can point to ways that they have been changed by stressful circumstances in ways that they value. Mm-hmm. So it can be the case that if you've spent a decade in a situation that was highly stressful, particularly, let's say, uncontrollable stress. So maybe you spent a lot of your time in a state of vigilance. Maybe your blood pressure was elevated because you were trying to protect yourself from threats. It's possible that you have an increased risk of heart disease, or you have sustained levels of inflammation or high blood pressure. That's a consequence of the life that you've had and the way that your brain and body were trying to help you through it. And also, it may be the case that some of those experiences change your brain in ways that make you better able to handle crises, that have increased your empathy for others. It may be the case that it strengthened your sense of purpose in life. That both can be true at the same time. The other thing I'll say is that none of those, what we think of as like the inevitable toxic consequences of stress, none of them are inevitable. It's not the case that you can say, if you had a traumatic childhood, your the genes that are expressed in your body right now have been permanently altered so that you are forever at increased risk of depression or dementia. I mean, you sometimes see this sort of language in news studies or media reports. It's not the case that you can say, if you're somebody who has dealt with discrimination, that's it. Your cardiovascular system, your immune system is shot. It's because that's bad for you. It's not the case that there's that kind of consequence. There are many things that seem to protect people from the worst possible consequences of whatever you have lived through. So some of those things are having a sense of purpose in life. Some of those things are having an opportunity to give back to others. You know, there's really interesting studies that show that if you are somebody who regularly volunteers in your community or has found a way to give back, that if you experience a major stressful life event, like a divorce or the loss of a loved one, you lose your job, like a really big stressful life event, but you are somebody who is actively involved in giving back, statistically speaking, you are not at increased risk of a stress-related health or mental health disorder. Now, that doesn't mean I can guarantee for you that you're not going to develop some sort of health problem or that you won't become anxious or depressed. I can't guarantee that for you as an individual, but statistically speaking, that increased risk is zero. But if you're somebody who doesn't give back to your community, then every stressful life event is associated with an increased risk of a new physical or mental health problem. So there are a lot of studies like that. And so I feel like it's, you know, you have to learn to hold these opposites, because I never want people to feel like if they're living with the consequences of the stress that they've been through, that like, if only they'd done it right, they could have avoided that illness. Or, you know, for example, I have chronic pain, and I know there's a relationship between certain types of stress and being in pain. And there's no way of thinking about stress that's going to suddenly, for me, get rid of the experience of pain. But I also know that there are a lot of things I've been able to add into my life that have increased my ability to make meaning and experience connection and find joy. And that has actually really reduced the way that stress and pain have a negative impact on my ability to engage with life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what's interesting when I think about this subject kind of in a larger kind of cultural lens, and I've seen this a lot in my program, is that so much in modern medicine or psychiatry or the wellness industry or is kind of actually trying to, in many ways, shave off all the rough edges of being human. We basically said that anxiety is bad, depression's bad, stress is bad. And of course, at elevated disorder levels, yes.
And when you're in the middle of it, it's not like it feels good.
Of course.
Right? I mean, it makes sense.
But the question is then, you know, these are also core aspects of our humanity and who we are as humans. We're designed to go through things, to change, to be aware of these states that we're in. And of course, people that need help need to get it. In no way would I ever say that. But I think that I like the way that you're talking about this, which is like, let's have a more open-ended conversation about this stuff before it's just dismissed wholeheartedly from the table, right?
I mean, I do. And the other thing, so you mentioned anxiety. I didn't mean to give you that definition, because anxiety is another thing that's really complicated in that nobody wants it. But if your primary coping strategy is avoid it, it just makes things so much worse. So let me define what it is. Anxiety is basically you trying to harness your stress strengths before you need to. Right? Anxiety is practicing for stress. You think about it, you plan for it, you talk to people about it, you reach out for help, you try to control things before you can control them. It's like whatever your default stress responses are, you're trying to do them in advance, because you are trying to avoid or prevent an experience you don't want, or make sure that you have the best possible experience that you can. So, anxiety. So, in some sense, okay, anxiety occasionally can be helpful, but a lot of us who have anxiety, it's not like a once a week thing. It's a default orientation to life where we're always in advance thinking about how we'll respond to a reality that is not actually unfolding in the present moment, right? If it's real and you have to deal with it, that's not anxiety. If you got bad news and you have to figure out a way to support someone or support yourself and adapt, that's stress. Anxiety is you haven't gotten the diagnosis yet, or you haven't heard from your loved one in a while, or there's a change that's going to happen and it hasn't gone badly, but it could, right? That's anxiety. So one thing we know is that it is possible, if you're somebody who has a tendency towards anxiety, you can get better at dealing with it by figuring out like what coping strategies you engage actually are useful. Is it useful when you talk to someone about what you're worried about? Is it useful when you imagine the worst case scenario and you make a plan for it? Sometimes people talk about that as stress inoculation. They teach that in therapy sometimes. You could actually plan for the worst in advance. For some people, that actually creates a kind of anticipatory resilience. For other people, that is not the best coping strategy. So a lot of it is sort of figuring out, if I'm going to have an experience of anxiety, which of my stress strengths do I want to bring to it that allows me to stay engaged, that allows me to actually keep making choices that put my values and my goals and my relationships first. Because here's what usually happens. People hate the feeling of anxiety so much. And in that moment, that feeling of anxiety, they're really worried about the thing in the future they don't want, the overwhelm, the panic attack, the not being able to control things, the discomfort, whatever it is, failure. They get they so want to avoid that they then avoid the circumstance in which that could unfold. And as a therapist, that once people make avoidance their default coping strategy, life gets very small and you start to shrink, not really the suffering as much as like we wish that's what we could control. Often we don't manage to avoid the pain, the suffering, but we start shrinking our experience of the things that actually give us strength or that teach us we're stronger than we thought, or that bring us joy and hope.
Yeah. So, one of the major kind of baskets of work at hospice, and it's something that I felt so called to, was grief counseling. And people here that are tuning in may be here because they're interested in questions of grief or end of life. And how do you understand the very complicated, wide open, sometimes difficult to define landscape of grief in perhaps some of in the context in which we're talking? Is it related to stress? Does grief create a stress response? Where does this fit in terms of your understanding?
Yeah. So one thing that comes to mind is that when you ask people what has been the most stressful experience of your life, they very often will mention the death of a loved one.
Right.
And really, I think what that points to is it's one of the most difficult experiences in our lives. But when you look at what grief actually feels like, what happens in people's brains and bodies during really heightened grief, it looks really different from most types of stress responses. And I know in my experience as well, what it feels like is as if every stress strength you ever had gets sucked into some kind of black hole. And it almost feels like a complete shutdown. For me, it has felt like a complete shutdown of the motivation to reach out, the ability to reach out, the belief that anything good could happen if I take action, the lack of desire to move towards goals or action, and a pain that comes from reflection, right? That my mind keeps getting drawn back to things that actually hurt, like memories associated with the dying process, or regrets that I have, or guilt that I have. So it's almost like biologically, grief, it looks like the opposite of stress, as being something that pushes you to engage with life,
Mm.
because stress is about believing there's something you can do and something you can choose to
Yeah.
get what you want or protect yourself. And I think a lot of people have this experience in grief that that's not what reality is in that moment. And yet at the same time, so grief has come up a lot in my work, and in the last two books that I wrote about stress and about movement. And when people talk about being able to integrate grief in their lives and move forward, they often talk about being able to reconnect with the things that do give us strength or hope in difficult times, or this ability to make meaning moving forward. So the three big stress strengths that I talk about are action, positive action,
Mhm.
reaching out to others and connecting with others, often helping others, and growing, making meaning, deciding that there might not have been a reason that something happened, but that doesn't mean that you can't put it in service of something, right? That's really different. A reason something happened is like a story. Or it may not be true, but to decide you're going to put something in service of something you care about. A lot of people I've talked to who dealt with really difficult grief, that's what pulled them out of it, to say, I'm going to choose to put this pain and this experience in service of helping other people who are going through it, is the most common. So I feel like there's something we can learn from stress about how people get through grief. And one of the groups that I write about in my book on stress is the dinner party. And I really loved their approach to grief, which was to host dinner parties with people who are dealing with grief, lost a loved one, and don't necessarily feel like they can talk about it freely and openly in their lives. That maybe they felt that people have pulled back or express pity, but not real empathy. And they want a place where they can talk about their loved one and talk about grief, and also enjoy food and laughter and have a whole complicated experience of it, where they can have that full reality with people who understand. And I feel like that also, that's not just grief, that can be really useful for, as you know, as I said earlier, that is a lesson that I'm continuously trying to learn myself.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I think about when I was at hospice doing so much of the grief work myself, and so much of it, if not 80 or 90%, was just being able to open the door and let someone come in, and they, sometimes they'll say, I can't believe I want to talk about this again, but I need to talk about it again. I need to explore my grief again. And I remember so much of the work as a counselor saying, yes, we're here together. It could be our 20th session and we can still talk about it, because I understand that's the way that grief works. It helps to be in connection with someone in a space in which one feels heard and one can share stories. And I think it gets to that essential quality of being able to connect through those experiences, to find the humanness between them, right? I mean, I think that's kind of what we're getting at.
And I think, the other idea that I've been really, my heart is made glad to see, is not being stigmatized the way it has been in the past, is this finding a way to maintain a bond with
Right.
a lost loved one, that it's not pathological to keep stuff and smell things and talk to them like they're there and tell stories, that whatever you can do to maintain a bond, because part of grief, and again, that I know that not everyone is as obsessed with biology and like how the brain works as I am, but for me, I've always felt like hearing something about how my brain works, for me, it's like a kind of self-compassion. And one of the things that people have seen in grief is this unbelievable yearning that happens. It's like the brain is so hungry to re-experience connection. It's like the strongest hunger that you can experience. And I think that when you have some compassion for yourself, and anything you do that might not make sense to other people, that allows you to feel that continued bond, that is an act of kindness to yourself. And I also believe it is a true continued bond, that relationships can continue.
Right.
And that is something that, when you can find a way to do that, is really worth savoring and cherishing. And you had said we might talk about nature, and I want to just highlight that was one of the most, for me, moving stories that I heard when I was talking to people about the role that exercise has played in their life. And this woman talked to me about how the only time she felt she could truly connect with her son was when she was running outdoors in nature. And that there was something about being in nature that allowed her to feel a real, true, genuine connection with her son. And I feel like for a lot of people, I've heard this from a lot of people, that there's something about spending time in nature that invites in an awareness, a connection that that is harder to experience in other ways, and to trust that. But if it's not nature for you, if it's music, if it's church, if it's memories, if it's something else, to trust what it is that allows you to find that connection.
I love this conversation. I mean, I've thought a lot about this, about what is the kind of the healing essence of nature, particularly in grief. And I think we could probably spend a lot of time on this. And I think what I think of too is the way in which oftentimes nature, in being in it, forces you to slow down a little bit. It's almost forced contemplation. And I think that for some, that moment of quiet is one that is so difficult to get in a very busy life. And I think that's just one aspect of that is so helpful. And another one that comes to mind, and this is somebody up in the Bay Area near you, a psychologist, Dacher Keltner, up at UC Berkeley, who writes about, particularly, it could be that being in nature brings about an emotion of awe, which is being studied a lot more now. I love this. And what is it about being in the presence of something that is grand and beautiful and that takes your breath away, that also has some kind of, again, healing capacity? I wonder if you've heard of his work, or if that.
Yeah, I know Dacher. Yes. So a couple things to say. First of all, there is research showing that when people spend time in nature, it allows them to experience a spontaneous mindfulness. So when you mentioned that slowing down, that it truly, this is especially true for people whose minds are not always kind to them, people who struggle with depression, anxiety, rumination, self-criticism. Being in nature often shifts the brain into a state that looks like what you see in people who have meditated for thousands of hours and really learned how to still the mind and open to the present moment. And if you have not been able to do that through meditation, or you struggle with finding any kind of peace of mind because your mind has these tendencies that create pain and suffering, for a lot of people, spending time in nature creates a profound relief. Again, it's always worth seeing if this is true for you. So you mentioned awe, and it's interesting. I was just having this conversation with my husband about two emotions that are similar but different. One of them is awe. And awe is this feeling of being sometimes humbled and sometimes uplifted by an awareness of something bigger than yourself and a connection to something bigger than yourself. And people often feel this in nature. And it can have a lot of positive benefits. It can give us hope. It can help us find meaning. It can increase our ability to connect with other people. But the emotion that I really love is related. And it's the emotion of being moved. It's like the technical term, by humanity. And it's that feeling you get when, like, you see people who've been separated reunite and they're weeping with joy. And you're so moved by seeing that reunion. Or you see somebody be extraordinarily brave or kind. That joy that you get, the way it like stirs your heart and also brings a tear to your eye, that's like the human version of awe, but it feels different. And that's my favorite emotion. And I have found that it's one of the the spiritual or psychological practices that's really important for me is to notice the things that move me in that way, because that's how I find hope. And that often helps me feel less alone. So humans are so interesting that, we have lots of ways to do this, and we're not all the same, but there's a certain repertoire of things that we can turn to that we might discover our thing that bring us
And
hope.
I have to say, I don't know, totally random aside, but pets factor into this. I
I
find the
know.
happiest place in the world is go at 5 o'clock to like a doggy daycare place where the owner is reunited with the dog who has been gone all day long, and watch the expression of joy from the dog and the owner. I mean, it's almost overwhelming. So if you're having a bad day, go do that this afternoon, and I promise there will be some benefits.
That's why I loved working in cat adoption. Like, it's one of the best feelings in the world as I'm projecting onto this cat who's now leaving a cage and going to a home. Like, that's my version of it.
Right. Um, in just a little bit, we're going to shift gears and talk about. You're going to bring in, I think, some really interesting body movement and dance and stuff you've been really looking at closely. But I very quickly want to touch on one last thing in about 5 minutes here, which is the role, I think, also of caregiving, which is a big aspect of hospice as well. And I bring this up because I'm going to throw something at you to see if I can complicate it just a little bit, but. I remember I was doing a show on burnout on my program, and the scholar I was speaking to said one of the first times that burnout was studied was something called caretaking syndrome. It was caretakers that were maxed, and it was too much, and they were burned out, and that became applied to so many other parts of the modern world. And so I say that to you because I know you think caretaking can be also quite important. It can be good for us, and I know how hard it is too. So getting to this question of human connection, when it's healthy, when it's not, what are your thoughts on that? It's kind of a big one for me.
Yeah. So caretaking is a really complex example, because if you were to look, as you said, at the research, you will see really strong evidence that caretaking is one of the most stressful things people can go through, particularly when they are not supported in it, when the situation is taxing their resources. And this can be because of lack of family support, lack of financial support, just how hard my family has been through a lot of this recently, just how hard it is to navigate everything.
Yeah.
So there's no doubt that caretaking can be one of those stresses that really does take a toll, and is, moment to moment can make you question whether you have what it takes to even just to keep going to the next moment.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of research that caregiving is one of the greatest sources of meaning that people experience in life. And that given the reality of the situation, right? So that often the thing that is really the thing that's hard is somebody needs caregiving. It's the illness, it's the disability, it's the situation. But whether or not you caregive, that's not the thing that you want to toggle in order to protect yourself. In that situation, caregiving often increases people's ability to make sense of the difficult experience, to make some meaning from it, to, in some cases, deepen a relationship, or to behave in a way that reflects their values. That becomes a story that when they're in it is impossible, but afterwards becomes a story that helps them understand who they are, what their values are. So it's both.
Right.
And there's not a lot of research about making it easier, because it's not an easy situation.
Mm-hmm.
The research that I've seen that looks at how do you help yourself or help someone else who's going through this is, one of the things that seems to help is to find a way every day to acknowledge a choice that you made or an action you took that is consistent with your values, or that was a positive moment of connection. Because often it could be like the day is 90% not great, And then maybe there was 10% where you were proud of yourself, or you got something done that really improved the situation, or you felt connected to the person you're caring for. There has to be some way of noticing that and acknowledging it as a kind of a balance. And then, of course, the other thing is finding a way to get support when you can. And if you're the caregiver, it's not always easy to do that. So this is more the message for people who are a little bit on the periphery. If you can help your caregivers do it.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Well, you're making my job easy as a moderator, because we have just about 10 minutes left here. And I want to save this for, I think, a really kind of exciting participatory exercise.
I'm excited.
Yeah, and I'm excited for this particularly because I love seeing the ways in which the body is being kind of brought back into modalities of healing again, and dance and music. And I'm going to let you talk more about that, but I'm handing it over to you now for something I've been looking forward to. So take it away.
Okay, so yes, all of you who are here, this exciting participatory activity is going to be a 3-minute dance party that I'm going to guide you through. Now, you may think you can't dance. You're going to do fine. You may be in a chair or in a bed and have some limited ability to move. If you can move anything, your hands, your face, that it's going to work. So we will get there. And I hope that it will be a joyful experience for you. But let me give a little bit of context first. So one thing we haven't talked about is that I have taught movement, yoga, and dance for more than 20 years. And it's been a tremendous source of joy and meaning for me. And over the years, one of the experiences that I've consistently had is to have people in my community who are going through health crises and who have lost a loved one and are dealing with grief have said that there's something about dance and music that if you surrender to it, if you let go, can be a moment that reminds you of your capacity for joy or hope or connection, even with the rest of it, in all the rest of it. And I've seen that again and again, people using dance and music, and particularly dancing in community, as a way to remind themselves that it is possible to feel joy. And sometimes it's just going through the motions, and sometimes it's actual experiences of joy and connection and hope. And it's one of the reasons why I teach dance, to create that kind of space for people. So what we're going to do today is based on research looking at how people naturally move their bodies when they are feeling joy, when they feel connected to others, like in a reunion or a celebration, or when they want to express hope, right? There are actual physical embodiments to these feelings and states, and they're very similar around the world in different cultures across the lifespan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you a few of what those movements look like. I'm sure you'll recognize them. These are movements people do in celebration, in moments of connection. And after I teach them to you, I'm going to put on a song that is an expression of joy and an invitation to connect. And I'm going to hold up cue cards like this. And when I hold up the cue card, that is a reminder to you to do that joy move in any way that works for your body. And it's an experiment. We're going to see how it feels. And it's a stance that you can choose to take, that you're going to choose joy for 3 minutes. Okay, so here's what the moves are. I'm going to demonstrate them in a chair and also standing. For those of you who have the ability to stand and you've got some room, if it feels good, you can go full out. You can make this like a big old dance party if you want, or you can make your movements very small, but connect to the feeling behind it. Okay, so the first joy move is bouncing. So let's find a part of your body that you can bounce, right? So one thing that people often do, and there'll be music, so it's going to be even better when there's music, right? You can nod your head. You can bounce your head. what you'll often see when people are really happy, they make fists and they bounce their shoulders. This is such a common expression of joy. And if they got really good news, sometimes they're like, they throw their arms in the air. You can also bounce if you're standing, right? You can bounce by bouncing your knees. You can bounce side to side. Bouncing can also feel like shaking. It's a nice loose kind of energy. Okay, so hopefully you found some part of your body that can bounce. I'm going to probably bounce my shoulders because I love this movement. The next joy move is called keeping the beat. And this is particularly about feeling connected. So we know that when people move in synchrony to music or in synchrony with one another, they feel more connected to community and to something bigger than themselves and to emotions like joy and hope. So when we hear this music, I'm going to invite you at times to keep the beat, and it can be clapping. You can just keep my beat right now. You can clap. You can tap some part of your body. You could be like tapping your chest. You could slap your thighs. You could snap. You can do any movement. You could tap your feet if you want. And then if you're standing, one of the best big dance moves of keeping the beat is a step clap, right? So those are all options. And again, I invite you just to think, okay, when I see that cue card, keep the beat. Am I going to clap? Am I going to snap? How are you going to feel that beat and feel connected to us? All right, there are 5, by the way. The next is sway, sway. And this, so you could start to see right now, is there any part of your body that could sway easily? So sometimes it's the head. Sometimes it feels good to sway your shoulders. It could be like a rolling action or one at a time. We also know that when people are really feeling happy or they're really feeling connected, sometimes they do this big sway with their arms. You can imagine like you're at a concert or you're singing in a choir or you're at like a sporting event and you're doing the wave, right? So you can sway. Swaying is often smooth. It's like a wave going through your body. And if you want to really dance, right, you can sway your hips. You can sway your whole body. You can even sway in space. It's a slightly different expression of joy. Hopefully you'll find one that you really like. All right, 2 more joy moves before the song comes on. This one, showing off or celebrating. This is like, if you can imagine if you were at a party and everybody at the party loves you, and they put you in the center of a circle and they're cheering for you. You can do no wrong. Sometimes I imagine it's like a bunch of 4-year-olds who think I'm the coolest person in the world. It can be whatever you want to imagine. Easily impressed 4-year-olds. And you get in that center of the circle, and all you have to do is bask. Maybe you pose. Maybe you do your bad move. You're like your little shimmy, your shake. You could like show it off. You could flex. Like, what would you do if you just scored a goal, right? And like, if you were an athlete who just won something, maybe you do the classic like triumph gesture. And then I'm going to teach you the dance move if you want. Classic show off move is the peacock, where you imagine you have to show the full 360. Just like a peacock does. If you've ever seen a peacock try to impress a mate, they get really big and they turn it around. Right. So this could be your classic show off move. And it's the one that I'll do. I'm going to just turn it around. Yeah. And it feels good sometimes to spin or sway, to like turn it around. Okay. And here's the last one. Anything goes. You just do whatever you want. Move, smile, clap, sing, jump, move your hands, sign language if you know it, right? Anything you want that just is an expression in this moment of whatever would feel good or however you want to express yourself. So I've got 5 moves, and there's no way to do this wrong. Even if you decide you just want to watch me, maybe my joy will be a little bit contagious and you can just breathe it in and feel connected in that way. Okay, we have no time to lose. So standing, sitting, lying down, let me get the music going. And about every 30 seconds, you are going to see a different cue card. Just check out the screen every now and then and see what's up. Okay. Sharing my audio, 3 minutes dance party. We're gonna start with bounce.
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here. You can take a break. I'm a hot air balloon that could go to space. With the air, like I don't care, baby, by the way. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Here come bad news, talking this and that. Well, give me all you got and don't hold it back. Well, I should probably warn you, I'll be just fine. No offense to you, don't waste your time. Here's why. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Hey, go, bring me down, can't none bring me down. Your love is too high, bring me down, can't none bring me down. I said, bring me down, can't none bring me down. Your love is too high, bring me down, can't none bring me down. I said, because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Hey, go, bring me down, can't none bring me down. Your love is too high, bring me down, can't none bring me down. I said, because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do.
That's it.
So don't you dare look back, just keep your eyes on.
Another of my favorite songs to dance to.
That was wonderful, Kelly. I loved the energy, the enthusiasm, and what's very clear is that David Selberg and I need to go take dance lessons with you up in California. So we're gonna head up there because we have some moves to learn. But really, that was such a joy. So thank you for sharing that with us. It
Well, I
was
see someone's asking about the song. That was Happy, the song Happy. Really easy to find by Pharrell Williams. But if you just look up Happy song, promise you'll find it anywhere.
Yes. Well, we've just reached the end of the conversation. And Kelly, I just want to say how much I've just truly enjoyed spending this hour with you and just being able to pinball ideas back and forth and see where they take us. It's my favorite type of conversation. So thanks for being a part of this. And it was wonderful to share the space with you.
Thank you. I'm just going through the chat too. I just want folks to know that I am checking in, and thank you.
Yes. All right. Well, that being said, I hate to close this out, but I'm now going to hand it off to David to greet us and tell us what is next for the series and hospice, and to say goodbye. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you so much, Jonathan. What a wonderful, powerful conversation we were all a part of, all of us listening and participating. Thank you both. We are so pleased to be able to offer the Illuminate Speaker Series for free, but we couldn't do it without your help. So please consider a donation to ensure the future of this series by clicking the link in the chat here, or you just visit our website to sign up for our next upcoming Illuminate events. They're all free and open to everyone. Our next speaker will be Richard Louv on Wednesday, October 19th. Richard Louv is a journalist and author of 10 books. We'll share what some of those books are on our website, so visit that, please. Richard helped launch an international movement to connect children, families, and communities to nature. He is the co-founder and chairman emeritus of the Children and Nature Network, an organization helping build the movement. There's more information again here on our chat feature. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight. Have a really wonderful evening and rest of your week.